We need to start from the beginning of Jennings' history, because it wasn't always an asylum, and it certainly wasn't always filled with thousands of bodies. At first, it was just a 3-story house on 160 acres of land. In 1854, the Cook County farm opened as a refuge for poor families and people who needed help. Records of this place are a little sparse and contradictory, but generally we know that people were able to grow food, and some articles mention services like having a school for children. But other articles emphasize that the offerings were slim, and it was really just a place for people to sleep and eat who had fallen on hard times. As the years progressed, it started being described as buildings that were kind of like barns. The heating was insufficient, there was no ventilation, no hot water, and people would go sometimes for days without bathing. In a very gross way, this was a win for the elite of Chicago, because now the homeless had a place to go, and they didn't have that sort of riffraff on their street anymore. Unfortunately, even though the farm was built for people who were experiencing poverty, lots of people with mental illness ended up at the farm before they were equipped to handle it. In the mid-1860s, the Cook County farm added an insane department to its name, and by 1870, they had created an entire separate entity and building, the Cook County Insane Asylum. And by this time, the area had diversified even more, taking in sick patients and people with tuberculosis. So as you can imagine, there were a lot of different people who died there from a bunch of different stuff. Other people took advantage of this untouched space. So in 1858, City Cemetery, which is underneath today's Lincoln Park area, was up to its eyes in bodies. So much so that by 1866, no more people were allowed to be buried there. It got to the point where they had to move bodies from this area. And if you had money, you got to go to places like Graceland and Rose Hill. And if you didn't, you went to the Cook County farm. Pretty much at this point, the city was putting everyone there who had no other place to be buried. After the Great Chicago Fire, 117 bodies were gathered up by the coroner and dumped at Dunning, and 107 of them were never identified. Researchers believe that between 1854 and 1912, 16,315 bodies were buried in what is today known as Dunning, which likely doesn't include cadavers donated to medical schools, but I'm assuming that those in particular were hard to track because of all the body snatching. We're gonna get there, I promise.